Hello and good morning. It is Thursday, September 17th, and I've been away for a while, just kind of dealing with home and family stuff and trying to recalibrate balance in my life. But thought it was time to come back and continue some discussions. I've really missed kind of hearing some of the thoughts of people as we're going through this coronavirus crisis and everything else that's going on. So I thought I'd start today with going over a blog post that I wrote. I guess it was back in 2014. That was my response to the question that I would get very frequently about, what is it that you believe now? I think, if you're like me and you continue to interact with people who are in the church, particularly loved ones and family members, sometimes they will confront you with this question of, well, I don't want to hear about your criticisms of the church. I want to hear about what you believe now. And I think there's something to that in the way that it's done. And so I tried to put my response into this post. And it's one that I frequently refer people to when they confront me with this question. So we're just going to dive right into that, and then we'll take some calls and see what is on people's minds. So let me see if I can pull this up here. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a post that you can find on the blog, Thoughts on Things and Stuff. It's called The Sweet Ride of Mormonism. And let's see what we can find here. I got to get all my stuff set up here. Okay. I'm going to change my microphone setting there so I can just get a little bit more clear audio. All right. One of the common experiences that I've encountered from both family and friends alike is the question, what do you believe about God now? In some cases, the question is simply put just like that. In other cases, it is included in a tirade against how vocal I have been about the problems that I've discovered in Mormon church history and theology that led to the church losing me as one of its adherents. Now, I don't want to hear about why you don't believe in Mormonism or why Joseph Smith was not a prophet in your opinion. I only want to hear about what you believe now. Testify about what you believe in. Or, I don't want to see you tearing things down. Just build things up in what you believe now. Now, I have to admit, this is a very tempting road to go down. And I have on occasion. But I have some valid reasons for holding my own beliefs somewhat close to my chest. Many of these reasons would be difficult to understand until you go through the process of acknowledging that you've been caught in a grand religious deception your whole life and start to find a way out of it. I'd like to articulate some of these reasons so that my friends and family can understand why they will read more about my observations about what's wrong with the Mormon church than what answers I have found. A sweet ride. I asked my 8-year-old daughter to design a car that would fulfill every dream she had about what an automobile could be. I specifically told her not to worry about what was normal or beyond the laws of physics, and I instructed her not to worry about making the car look like any other car that she'd ever seen. I left her alone for a while, and a few hours later she presented me with this masterpiece, The Sweet Ride. Now, I asked her to describe all the different features that she incorporated into this amazing car that she proudly called the Sweet Ride. She meticulously described the unique features of her vehicle. It had a 1,000 pony-powered engine, more pony power than even the fastest race car. It's fueled by any flavor of soda pop. You can fill up at any restaurant with a soda fountain, especially if they have free refills. Marshmallow wheels with lemon candy hubcaps for the softest and sweetest ride you've ever had. Edible cupcake hood ornament in case you get hungry on the road. Lollipop front and rear bumpers, the ultimate in safety features. Glow-in-the-dark cotton candy fringed canopy with a bubblegum hood joint provides shades and snacks for when you need it. Rock candy windshield, crystal clear protection for the driver, cotton candy soft serve seat cushions for the softest seat you've ever felt, Nutter Butter doors with a unique waffle pattern with the best combination of peanut butter and chocolate ever found in a door. Red licorice trim for pretty details, rock candy reflector headlights as bright as the sun. You can see all of these details just in their delicious sweet glory. All these beautiful features. Now, when you really look at it, this car is amazing. Its confectionery details fulfill my daughter's dreams and solve the problems that she has frequently articulated about our more conventional minivan. It has absolutely no basis in reality and stands in complete opposition to the laws of physics, economics, and common sense. That doesn't matter to my daughter. To further assess my daughter's commitment to her dream car, I pulled up a very sensible alternative and showed it side by side with hers. Next, I asked her a few questions. Okay, me, would you trade your soda pop fueled sweet ride with all of its marshmallow wheels, soft serve seats, and 1,000 pony power engine for this sensible white 1992 Toyota Corolla? It was one of the most dependable and trusted vehicles of its year. And my daughter, no way, my car is way cooler. And me, well, this car runs on gas. Her, well, mine runs on soda pop, and if you get thirsty, you can drink some. Me, well, this car will go a long way without breaking down. Her, mine never breaks down. It's got cotton candy. Dad, I really have the sweeter ride. Me, I got nothing else. I would rather choose your car too. Joseph Smith's sweet ride. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's position and try to understand their motivations and perspectives. To understand the mind of someone who the church has lost due to issues of doctrine and church history, you have to look at things from their perspective. To these people, the Mormon religion arose from the imagination of Joseph Smith. He used his very capable mind to create a religion which answered all of the important questions of the early 19th century religious environment. Questions of grace and works, infant baptism, pre-existence, and election are all given authoritative answers, and additional details are piled on top which give the religion amazing and appealing features. Eternal families, sacred temple rituals, divine, authentic authority. All of these features fulfilled his own dreams of pure religion and solved the problems that he saw in other faiths at the time. If you read about his early childhood, parental views on religion, and so forth, you see that they also answer important questions from his direct family as well. Now, from the perspective of someone who does not accept his divine calling, all of these remarkable features articulated by Joseph Smith through the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, translations of the Bible, and direct revelations from God, they paint the picture of a religion that is every bit as appealing as my daughter's sweet ride, but just as divorced from reality or truth. Furthermore, while Joseph was undoubtedly skilled at integrating all of these features into a cohesive faith, his work has been tweaked, improved, and refined over the decades since his death. Features such as blood atonement, polygamy, and racism, which created more problems than solutions, were eventually discarded, smoothing the rough edges of the faith. This presents the modern-day believer with a very desirable religion which they can hold up in comparison to anything else. When a believing Mormon compares their theology to anyone else's system of belief, especially if it's confined to logic and rationality, but also if it's limited to biblical assertions, they're going to find that everything else pales in comparison. They already have the sweeter ride. True, and then related. Now, the thing to remember when considering what people go through as they start to think about the church is that there are two separate issues that they must confront. First, is the church true? And second, if not, what is true? Now, the thing to remember is that the answer to number one is no, the church, its doctrine, its claims of exclusive prophetic authority are not what it claims to be. Then question two is completely unrelated to whatever those claims were in the first place. This can be a bit confusing to grasp, so the illustration of the sweet ride can help clarify. It doesn't matter what my daughter designed her car to be. It could have run on infinitely renewable electrostatic energy from the Earth's atmosphere, had 1 billion horsepower engine and the capacity to seat 4,000. Since she was making it up, she could design it to be anything at all. This fanciful creation was based on imagination rather than truth and would always trump any real car bound by the law of physics, design, and economics in a direct features comparison. But if you really need to get from Austin to New York City, choosing a made-up fanciful creation just because it fulfills your fantasy will not get you there in the real world. Once you abandon the sweet fantasy, You have to confront the world without your own appealing and comforting deception, and the search for truth on the merits of your own conscience and mind. Suddenly, you may look at that 1992 Toyota Corolla and other vehicles with new eyes, perhaps seeing some benefits that you previously overlooked because you were blinded by the confection in front of you. You may have decided that your role is simply to walk on the power of your own two legs. The raw wound. Another aspect of leaving Mormonism because of problems with history and doctrine is that you become very sensitive to allowing other people to dictate to you what God's law and truth are. Because of your experience as a Mormon, you know how powerful and convincing and enticing deception can be. You don't want to be taken on somebody else's ride. Many people who leave for these reasons are not people who are at the margins of LDS culture, but were people who are very devoted to the faith and doctrine of Mormonism. Many of them faithfully held callings for years and devoted tremendous time and effort in doing them because they believed so sincerely. To discover then that distortions and evasions were used to hide the history of the church and its founders is devastating. If they are like me, this realization sends these devoted followers into a frenzy of discovery, looking for every bit of covered-up deception, rationalized misdeed, and corrupt doctrine, trying to discover how truly extensive the lies are. Well, perhaps it's just the modern prophets who have gone astray. Then, perhaps Joseph was a fallen prophet, but he did have a divine experience. Then, perhaps the scripture that Joseph brought into being was true even though he was flawed. And then, maybe the Book of Mormon is true even though the Book of Abraham is false. And so on until you come to the realization that at every level of the foundation of church is built upon distortions and deception. It's packaged in a glazed form of godliness and piety and bound up in a self-regulating culture that discourages people from questioning it. You submitted some of the most precious aspects of your identity and life to another person's theology, which filled you with lies and deceit dressed up in a sweet disguise. When you finally extract this saccharine poison from your soul, you are changed. You're left with a deep, open wound in your heart. Your ability and desire to trust as a child trusts is gone. You recoil at anyone else telling you what to believe or what to do. How dare they? Don't they see how completely you have trusted before with only the purest intent, only to be completely and utterly deceived? It's as though once you had removed Joseph Smith's dagger from your heart, there's a line of other people presenting their own daggers for you to replace it with. Searching for truth. Acknowledging this, the former Mormon becomes very skeptical of claims of divine authority or truth from any other direction. Furthermore, they're aware that it is the ultimate in hubris for them to dictate truth to anyone else themselves. You begin a quest for truth in your own life, but from a humbled perspective. You realize that truth is an elusive thing. It's not handed down in prophetic edicts from people who you are prohibited from questioning. You may never get it exactly right, but a funny thing happens when you start searching for truth. The lies start to stand out and jump out at you. Their contours and patterns become more evident to your searching soul. So while you continue to seek for truth, you are empowered with the freedom to identify those lies for what they are and leave them behind. Conclusion. If you wish to have empathy with a former Mormon, it would be difficult for you to identify with this perspective because you don't see the gospel of Joseph Smith as a negative thing in your life. This is the point of empathy, however, to stretch your mind and put yourself in someone else's perspective, which is by definition different from your own. If you cannot or are unwilling to do so, then you cannot have empathy for them. This is why you won't hear too much about what I personally believe about the world on the blog. Rather than expound on my own answers to life's difficult problems, I focus on demonstrating the chips on the edges which reveal the darkness behind the shiny veneer of Mormonism. My goal is not to get people to adopt my particular notion of truth, but to allow them to examine their sweet ride and see if it meets the standard of truth. Once they discover the absent foundation of the church, they'll be able to look around and discover the world freshly with their own eyes. They will develop their own personal relationship with the divine, or pursue a life free from the deception and fantasy of others, myself included. It doesn't matter what the makeup of your imaginary car was or what anyone else's car was. Once you let go of your sweet fantasy, the important thing for you to do is to determine for yourself where you will find your belief and what standard of truth you will subscribe to. It's a very personal decision. And while others who are still holding on to the sweet ride you left behind will ask to see what jalopy you're driving around now, understand that it will always seem pedestrian to them by comparison. All right. So that's it. Let's go back to this. So, microphone. So I don't know if I had that to write again today in 2020, there might be some different changes to it, but I think the core essence of what I am discussing in it holds true. I recently, well, I don't know if it was recently, maybe a month and a half ago or so, did a Three Apostates podcast with a former Scientologist and a former Jehovah's Witness. And near the end, it may even have been off camera. This episode has not aired, but we got into a discussion about what the approach that we take in our respective forms of online activism. And both of the other people felt like it was their duty to not only inform people about the problems of their faith, Scientology or the Jehovah's Witness, but also to educate people about the truth and reality of atheism. And so they saw themselves as atheist evangelists in addition to educators about the reality of their faith. And I kind of told them, like, I specifically and intentionally don't do that. And the reason is that I consider what I'm doing is not telling people how to live or telling them how to see. What I want to do is try to give people a tool set for critical thinking. And I don't want to have responsibility for what happens in people's lives when they go down whatever path they want to choose. I want each individual with the tool set of critical thinking to make that determination for themselves. And so I specifically avoid going into my own personal. And they said, no. You know, people on YouTube, like, if you're going to do this, then you know, people are going to want to know what you believe, because, you know, it really helps you connect with your viewership, with your audience. And I think that's where there's just a little bit of a difference there in what this channel is for me and what their channels are for them, because both of them are professional YouTuber podcasters, where each of them, their primary vocation, their primary living is from the channel. And so I think for them, their audience is really more of a community, and it's something that they have to build up for it, whereas I take a very different approach. Anyway, so with all of that done, let's go ahead and see if we can open up the phone lines. If you have any commentary on what we just read, or if there's just other things happening in the world of your life around Mormonism that you'd like to talk about, you can call 210-422-2222 and you know, let us know what's going on. So let's see. The number again is 210-422-2222. Let's see what comments we have. Death Valley Days says, masterfully written and presented, Jonathan. Thank you for that. Of course, I go back over these things, and all I see are typos and grammatical snafus. Occasionally, I get one of my kiddos who is specializing in English grammar and editing to edit the crap that I put down on paper, and it always gets much clearer and concise when that happens, but I haven't had that opportunity because they're all off in college. Anyway, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can call 210-422-2222. And another thing that well, let's see here. We can probably, because I think, you know, it used to be back in the day that people would actually put comments on blog posts, and I think there were some interesting threads on that one. So let me see what we have here. Okay, so Hot Glue says, the problem with arbitrarily determining truth for yourself about what is God's law and truth or the sweet ride is that God doesn't have one truth for you and another truth for Joe, another for Sally, and so forth. It might be true that you're only ready to accept certain truths, but if any of the truths you accept aren't among God's truths, you've deceived yourself. Perhaps you covered this by saying you'll probably never get it exactly right. Okay, so maybe it's just okay that you're trying. Your heart is in the right place. And we can continue that in a little bit. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hello. I enjoy all of your podcasts, and I just want to tell you that I thought that Sweet Ride was incredible.
Oh, thanks.
Kids,
I'll convey that to my daughter, who's no longer 8 years old, but
yeah, kids are amazingly intuitive and imaginative and stuff, and I just
yeah.
thought it was excellent. And I do like your point relative to the agency and allow people to find their own truth and their own new life, you know. So I just want to tell you thank you so much for all of your
Oh.
work that you do.
Well, I appreciate it. I think that that notion, particularly with agency, Mormonism focuses so much on agency. You hear it said all the time. We respect, free agency is God's gift to us and everything. And
Right.
it's almost like, it's like the I've likened it to like the Febreze that they spray in the air so that you can't smell the stench of what they're actually doing. In the very same moment that they're talking all about how everybody has their free agency, there's this unspoken understanding that you have that if you don't choose, believe, and conform your life to what they are presenting you, then you will be spiritually dead and you'll lose your family and all these other things. It's the very antithesis of free agency. It's coercive, and I think
Oh
there's
yes.
there's some acknowledgement of that because they've stopped talking about free agency and now they talk about moral agency, which is that you're free to choose, but you have to choose the moral choice if you want to actually be in God's good graces.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that that's the way it is. However, it's the story about this being noonday. At noonday, we're in
No,
the
tell
last
me.
hour. Okay, well,
Oh,
it talks about the being in the last hour and before noonday, and what noonday represents is the full disclosure of the darkness. And it's kind of interesting. It's my belief that the numbers 1111 that show up a lot is giving us the clue that we're reaching noonday, and part of that's probably with technology, but all the darkness that they have been spewing out for the last 180 years has finally come to light, and I'm very much appreciative because it has destroyed many, many relationships and families. So
they
that's my take on noonday. When it becomes fully noon, then the sun is the brightest at that time. That's the concept.
and so the idea is that as we approach that brightest moment, then more and more darkness is trying to hide the light.
More and more darkness will be exposed.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm saying is that
Oh, okay.
we'll continue to, when it's kind of morning and it's kind of somewhat dusk or dark out there, we can get away with a lot because it's hidden. I
Yeah.
mean, so
Well,
that's my
certainly things like the internet, the ability for people to do their own study and then share their findings like this has played a big role in, I think, exposing a lot of this stuff. You kind of wonder, I'm always impressed when I encounter people who discovered a lot of the true history of the church and were able to escape it before the age of the internet because it was just so hard to actually get that information in the first place.
What year did the internet come out?
Well, I don't know that there was one particular year. I know that when I was in college, people were doing the precursor of the internet, which was where you had these little text command line things, and the universities were all connected with a sort of inter-university system. And then
Uh-huh.
Netscape came out and gave a graphic overlay to that. So that would have been, in the early '90s, late '80s, and that was probably after the bulletin board system era and everything. So, it's just been in the last several decades, which has been a
Yeah,
dramatic change.
the church uh, vault up there on the mountainside. That's where they keep a lot of this, a lot of the embarrassing history, and they kept it pretty much covered. But with the whole internet thing coming out, it's gotten out of the cat's out of the bag. The horses left the barn. you know,
Yeah.
I will say this that I did go through that whole experience in the year 2000, and I've seen pretty much the worst of what the stalking and gaslighting and harassing and photographing and threatening and all that kind of stuff, which I won't get into here. I've said enough already, but I thought that sweet ride is a sweet ride,
Yeah.
So, I'm going to hang up and listen to the other
All right.
callers and stuff, but I just want to give you my thumbs up on your program and all that you do. Okay,
Thank you very much for the call.
You're welcome.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye now. All right, so if you want to join the conversation, the phone number is 210-422-2222. Let's see. We were looking at somebody who was talking about how there's only one truth for God, which is... Oh, well, hold on. We don't even have to go to that. All right. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Got a good connection. Okay. Hey, this is FW Willis.
Hey, great to hear you.
So I just wanted to weigh in on kind of the main topic. Again, I missed the first bit, and I've just hopped on. But
That's all right.
I read the sort of summary last night, and I've been thinking about it. And this is my comment here. My wife was talking to her mother earlier this week, and they were both talking about how stressed I've been recently with my work and the things that I do. And she had just recently kind of come out to her mother that we were, changing our relationship with the church, let's say. And her mom said, well, I really wish you hadn't learned the things that you learned and gone down that rabbit hole. And my wife said, well, why? And her mother said, well, because, it's just sad to not have hope. And we were talking about that, and I thought, what a funny thing it was that way of thinking, that it's preferable to believe something that makes you feel good, even if there's a truth out there that would, sort of change that belief. And my response, which I gave to my wife, not to my mother-in-law, but was that I actually do feel hopeful, but it's a different type of hope now. I feel like prior to this experience, I had given the future to God and what we knew about God from the teachings of the church. And this whole idea of like, what's going to happen to the planet, what's going to happen to in society or culture and all these things was sort of like hands off. It's not up to us. It's really just God's deal, and if the world's going to end in fire, then that's his plan, but now I feel like responsible, and there's something we can actively do to make the world a better place for our kids and our grandchildren. And so that kind of like hope is transferred now to science and technology and education and the betterment of society and the advancement of the human race. And those are all things that come about from, diligent people really caring about others and doing what they can to make the world a better place with the tools that they have, and not just, fasting and praying. And so I do feel hopeful that there's a better future for our kids, and that, maybe we're not going to destroy our planet. And so there's a lot of work to do, and it's here and now. It's not like, well, pay your tithing, say your prayers, and then the happiness and the peace. And, the world is really a damned place, but the happiness will come in the next life, or in the, in the celestial kingdom, or however that works out. So it's a shift. And so that's basically my comment is that it doesn't, not having the church doesn't mean that you're without hope or that you're just sad, Yeah.
I think you articulated it very well, and there's so many different facets to how you conceive of those things. When she talked about hope, you might interpret that to mean that she's talking about the prospect of an eternal life with your family and loved ones. And I think you can
Sure.
talk to non-Mormon Christian people who find hope in their own doctrine and theology, and you can find even non-Christian faiths who, part of the function of religion throughout man's existence has been to provide some of those answers to those questions about life and death and the afterlife. But then the other side of the hope that maybe that you lost is this fear, because part of that hope being tied up in, particularly now, since we are an Armageddon type religion, a Latter Day religion, where there's this whole eschatology about what is going to happen in the end days, and it's
Yeah.
filled with fear and dread. And I remember, like, I don't know if you grew up in the decade that I did. There was this TV show. This was like in the Cold War era, where there was this looming threat of nuclear war, and there was this series called the Day After, which was like, nuclear war had happened, and this is what was happening with the
Uh-huh.
survivors. And I remember just like curling up in the fetal position behind my father's recliner, listening to this, just being terrified about it. And this is, when we were having like
Yeah.
drills in school about what happens if the
Sure.
alarm goes off. But that same mortal dread is tied in with the religion once you learn about, what is supposed to happen at the end times. We get a little bit of a glimpse of it in the third Nephi chapters when Christ returns
Yeah.
and cities are piled under. And I remember my mom would talk about these things, and it's all tied to every knee shall bow. And if you're doing the right things,
Mm-hmm.
tithing is fire insurance. What does that mean? Well,
Yep.
it means that you're going to be burnt if you're not in the right way when the time happens, and nobody will know when it happens. And so just part of losing the belief in the claims of the religion is also losing that mortal fear of Armageddon that is
Mm-hmm.
inherent to the way that the Latter-day Saints talk about it. And I think letting go of that allows you to embrace some of what you were talking about, a lot of what you were talking about how, we are at a moment in the history of mankind where crime, violence, death, pestilence, all of those things are the lowest that they've ever been because of
That's right.
the benefits of science, reason, liberal principles that allow freedom of thought and freedom of speech, so that conflict can be resolved through reasoned debate rather than through exercises of force and power. And so all of those things just give you, hopefully, some inspiration and hope for the future. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not, forces that may work against those shining principles that may be at play in the world. We still have political forces around the world that are tied more to authoritarian regimes that we would see as less liberating for our hope for the future. But it definitely does change how you contextualize all those things.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing with giving stepping away from that sort of being in lockstep with that way of thinking, seeing the world, and aligning your personality and your identity with everything that the church, that whole image that the church provides and the way of thinking. You see other people differently, like the whole human
Mm-hmm.
race and our neighbors. We it's almost like you don't realize how strongly that affects you until you can remove that lens. Just how much we really judge people, and
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
even people where we say, oh well, no, we love them, we love our neighbors. Well, you love them in like a kind of a condescending way of like, I love them and I want them to not burn in hell, sort of like, like, and you remove that lens, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, I've never seen everyone else on the planet as being the same as me. We were special, and they were the ones who didn't. They were missing something, or they didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that, the special secret. And I feel so much more compassionate now towards other people, and more charitable and forgiving, and all the things that we would espouse as members of the church. That's the other side of that.
I totally relate to that, and I hear it very frequently, and that is the concept of I didn't realize how much I judged everybody else until I realized that all the things that I thought that I was being obedient to were simply arbitrary commands by a religious authority. And so when I would look out, now this is not to say that things like rape, theft, and murder give you that sense, but it's things like not drinking coffee or tea or not having a beer at the end of a hard day of work. I would see other people do that. And even though, like you said, you would say, I love them, I don't judge them or whatever, just the fact knowing that you're obeying the commandments, and they just don't have the commandments yet. It's not, one day maybe if they have the faith, then they'll be able to join us and obey these commandments. It's a form of judgment you don't even realize, and what it does is it creates distance and separation. And so, my father was a convert to the church, and one of the things that I realized was that the lack of connection that I could feel with his brother, his family members, tied into this notion that they weren't members and we were, and we would go over there and he'd have a drink. And so it's like, my aunt died and passed away, and I had the opportunity, as who I am now, to go and attend the funeral and be there kind of representing my dad's side of the family. My dad passed away when I was 13. But it, like, to sit down with my uncle and to have a Bud Light and to have him feel accepted, and to have him feel like he could connect with somebody, because he felt the distance between him and his brother when my dad joined the church, and suddenly all of these things that were just normal were, you could see how they might feel like my dad had some sort of superiority complex or something. But to be able to connect with him just by sitting and having a beer was very special and meaningful to me, and my uncle even commented on how unexpected that was. So losing that distance that we have from our loved ones, that are on the basis of these arbitrary, proprietary moral boundaries that don't actually have anything to do with real morality, but are simply ways for the church to isolate and separate their members and give them this, us versus them, insider outsider mindset and worldview, is very powerful. So I can totally relate to what you're talking about there.
Yeah. And the stress, and I don't want to tie you up all day, so I'll hop off after this, but a lot of that stress that I think that on my side of the family, not everybody knows that we've made this decision. And some of the stress that my family members are picking up on is it's tangentially related to the decision that we've made, but only in the sense that I don't know how to navigate the social relationship with my family now. And that is stressful. It's not that I feel less joy because we lost faith in the truth claims of the church. It's that it's literally stressful to figure out how do I talk to my mom about this, who from her frame of mind just lost the eternal relationship with her son, and you know what I mean? Like, how do I forge ahead in an open and meaningful relationship? And I think we'll get there, but I don't know exactly what that looks like at the moment. I think a lot of people have been through this experience and dealt with the same things, but that's adding stress now that I think they pick up on as, oh, so see, he's not happy without the church. And it's like, actually our lives are we still have stress, but my wife and I, our relationship is so much better than it ever has been in the past. And that's great. But I still have this stuff to deal with. And that I think that's easily misinterpreted by people who just don't quite understand, and that's too bad. But we figure those things out, I guess, along the way.
Yeah, and especially if you're really early in this journey, and if your family hasn't had to deal with that before, there's this notion that the family, some families maybe have had to deal with black sheeps, where they go off, they do drugs, they make all these terrible mistakes, and so it seems like that. But then now families are having to deal with, wait a second, faithful, intelligent, clean-cut, well-meaning people are now leaving. How do I deal with that? And then what you're talking about in terms of, this distance that you even have, because you don't know how your family is going to take that. Even in my own family, I've had periods where I've been accused of doing Satan's work. And clearly there's a distance and a conflict that can come when you're being accused of things like that. But then over time, those relationships have improved and mended. And I think a lot of my family now, they just kind of roll their eyes about Crazy John and his online stuff, but they're still able to connect with me, and we make jokes and things like that. And I've been able to heal and work through those relationships. But at the beginning, you don't know how it's going to be accepted. And I think even with us, if you're my age and your parents are older, there's almost this fear of, well, if I talk to my mom or my dad about what I've found, they're at the end of their life where they may be like gearing up for the, what they believe that sweet ride into the sunset will be. And if I take their sweet ride away from them now, well, it's going to throw them into a fit of depression and everything. And so all these fears are very understandable. They're very real. We each have to kind of navigate them in our own way. And so I'm glad that you at least have your spouse there with you, taking that journey together. Many people don't have the benefit of that, and that presents its own difficulty because, all of the things that you've mentioned, your fears about how the family may react and how to navigate that, many of them are fueled by the narrative provided to them about who apostates are, what they are, what influences they are under. And it can, we run the risk of the church itself giving your family the idea that by making the choices you've made, you are inherently evil and a bond of Satan or under Satan's control and a disease that can infect other people. And that interferes with your family relationships in a whole, way that is so damaging to the very thing that the church claims to espouse, the family bonds. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Hey, absolutely. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time, Jonathan, everything that you do.
All right. Well, thanks for the call. Call back again sometime.
All right. No problem.
All right. Take care. All right. So if you'd like to join the conversation, phone number is 210-422-2222. Let's see here. We've got a few comments. All right. Matthew Allen says, my wife and I are now working to baseline what we believe and starting from scratch. My wife does a lot of eye rolling when church leaders talk now. I can definitely relate to that. You are on Talk on Things and Stuff. What's on your mind?
Hi, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Jonathan. Gimpy Geezer here.
Oh, Gimpy, it's great to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're back, and good to hear from you. And I'm glad I'm not the only one that is just telling you how appreciative they are of the stuff you've done. Hey, because I don't want to just seem like I'm gushing, but I got to tell you this. All the stuff you've done has helped me personally through my journey. I've been out just under 2 years, but and I think this about other people too that have helped me. I have my favorite podcasts and interviews and stuff that I watch and listen to, but I consider you one of the what I call real church history heroes. So what you're doing is super important and it helps people. Oh, also I have code names for some of those people. Can you guess what your code name is, John? Can you guess?
Let's see. It would have to be something about. I forget what it is. It's not dirty old bastard, is it? Or what?
It's magnificent.
Oh, magnificent bastard. Okay, well that's better than dirty old bastard.
No. He's a rapper. No. Streeter, real church history hero, magnificent bastard.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Hey, I promise.
That's kind of.
And also, I sincerely believe this. And if you ever decide, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore, I hope you leave your work up because you've got a catalog of really good stuff. I refer to it a lot, and I believe you're making a difference in you and others. I believe that after we're gone, if you know how things on the internet seem to have an extended life and you can't get rid of it. But I believe that after, you and I are gone and everything, that it will still make a difference. Some hot new comic will come out with their YouTube channel or whatever it's going to be then, but they will refer to you. And I want to give you specific reasons why I think. You got a really great sense of humor, but you're really patient, and you will go through the stuff. You'll go through a conference talk, you go through a topic very patiently, you or maybe another guest, and break it down. that is just, it's gold. It's gold. So I sincerely appreciate it, and I'm, happy to talk to you. Hey, John, I do want to weigh in on this. Because I'm known to ramble, as if you haven't figured that out, I jotted down a couple bullet points. Can I just kind of throw some stuff out there to kind of set up where I'm coming from? I do have some specific things I'd like to mention and get your feedback on too. Just real briefly, I'm 60 this month. So
Happy birthday.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm a gimpy geezer. But I've always been what I think of as an empathic person. And I've looked up the definition and everything, and it's not where it cripples me or whatever, but I've always been very, feeling very, compassionate towards people, to try to relate to just my nature. And I've often been called oversensitive, and I mean, it's true. It could be a blessing, it could be a curse. But, I'm a good guy. It's not in some woo-woo way or anything. I just have love in my heart, So, but I joined at age 20. So all my teen years were in the 70s, and I hit the 70s pretty hard. But I was fortunate to be raised in a good family. My folks are very loving. My brother and sister are wonderful. And my dad was the one that kind of taught, the moral principles of things. And he would say things like, he'd always, certain things he'd repeat over, like, hey, you can learn something from anybody, even a bum in the street. You know what I mean? It's like, these things, and honesty was a really big thing. Honesty and integrity. I mean, he hammered it home. I mean, he was cool. He also had a funny sense of humor, which I've got and passed down to my kids too, which I'm glad about that. But honesty and integrity. If you could, he was pretty cool and lenient, but if you were lied, it was a bad thing. So honesty really mattered in my family and upbringing. And it's just, having a good moral compass and stuff that so many people do. And then my mom, she took us to church now and then. I was raised in the South, and, Baptist church, Lutheran. And in my mid-teens, I went to a 6-week Lutheran confirmation class and everything. And I haven't heard about it since, but the pastor came in one time, and he starts talking about Martin Luther. And even Martin Luther had an angelic experience. And then as the pastor was telling this, he's all tearing up and crying about it. So, like you would see in a testimony meeting. But so I think a lot of things with religion kind of go in a supernatural realm. I know that I was in seeking mode at the time, which is, I guess I could have wound up anywhere, maybe nowhere at all. But I had personally written off organized religion, because of my upbringing. I had, feelings about the Savior and everything, and I'm totally down with, most of the stuff that's in the Beatitudes and, all that, Sermon on the Mount. I'm okay. I'm totally fine with that. And so I had written off organized religion, and then ironically enough, I through the friend of a friend, and I was taught in their home, a friend's home, from the missionaries, and they were totally different than I was. So I'm a young guy, long hair, good guy, but music is important in my family. I'm a guitar playing guy and playing in bands and stuff, and totally black and white opposite of these clean cut missionaries there. But here's the thing. I had Moroni's promise came true for me. And I don't know if someone who feels the Spirit, or those that are especially like raised in the church and they try so hard to feel the Spirit, and if they don't, then they're beating themselves up. They're not righteous enough. And if you do feel the Spirit, well, then you're beating yourself up because you're not living up to how you should be. It's like a curse. It's a double-edged sword. And but I'll tell you what, and it wasn't just once or anything, but the first time that I recognized it was super powerful. And then I felt the Spirit different times when the missionaries came, and many different times in church. I felt the Spirit. So from the TBM, True Believing Mormon perspective, now I've denied the Spirit. Oh my goodness, now I'm bound for outer doctrines and all this. But no, I felt the Spirit. But that was the foundation of my testimony, and that's what kept me in so long. I was in the church. The Mormon church had my mind for 38 years of my adult life. 38 years. And there was a brief time that I was inactive, but it didn't matter at that time because it had my mind. And I crawled back, and I went on a mission. I mean, joined at 20, and some years of adjustment and everything. But I crawled back. I sold my car. I went on a mission, because I think when you if you feel spiritual feelings, it leads to your convictions, deep personal convictions, and that leads to actions. So the pioneers, they were just as big of dupes as I was, but they're just heroic in their journey. I had nothing but respect for them. What they did was amazing, but they were all going under false pretenses. I made major choices, life choices, that I would have made different choices if it weren't for the church and that the spirituality.
It's interesting that you started with the notion that you're a very empathetic person or empathic person. And I think, there's a video that I did on something called mirror neurons, where part of our wiring as human creatures is that we tend, and some of us more than others, to take on some of the emotional feelings of things that we witness. And so if you see somebody crying, then you're going to start to feel sad, and you may even start crying as a means of connection. And I think some evolutionary biologists may read some meaning, some evolutionary advantage to something like that. But what that can do then in these religious contexts is that if you're wired that way, and then you're given the narrative that feeling those feelings as a mirror to the things that are said around you is the spirit talking to you and testifying of truth, well, then now you have a truth narrative that's based on some false assumptions that just take advantage of human physiology. And it's no surprise then that you would interpret those as truth and then translate that truth into choices that you make in your life. And it sounds like that was what happened.
Absolutely. John, I was hook, line, and sinker. I didn't know about Mormons. I didn't even know they didn't drink or smoke or anything. And I did, at the time. And yeah, absolutely. It had me, and it was all about the spirit. And of course, you tie that to the eternal families. I told them, if I die or whatever, make sure that they sing "Families Can Be Forever" at my funeral. And then so you take these feelings, and then also when I went to the LDS church, it's not a bunch of Manson cult people. It's doctors and lawyers, and everything is so precise. And remember, this is way back, and I mean, it's really embarrassing for me because I was a dupe for so long. I'm a cautionary tale, but there was no internet then and everything. Oh, they were so sure of themselves, and then. The previous caller, I agree with him because you don't really realize it. The church becomes part of your being in a way. It's so deep, and they have so many hooks and tethers and snares that you don't even see it till you're out, like the previous caller said. And the judge, I've always loved and been compassionate, but I did have that underlying feeling of, if they knew, and I was fortunate that my family was tolerant of me being a Mormon. And we had a relationship, but I still looked through that filter, Yeah. I still looked at through and so I was me being the only member. I was like, it's okay, and maybe their work can be done in the future. But see, it wasn't just religion for me. I wasn't looking for God or Jesus necessarily. I thought I had found the answers to life's questions. I mean, seriously, and there's something for everything. Oh, a pre-earth life, here's why I'm here, here's what happens after, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it all sounds so good. And you don't even think about the tithing. Like, oh, yeah, tithing is like a secondary thought. Yeah, of course you pay tithing. Yeah, that's
It's kind of like, it reminds me of that story that Gordon B. Hinckley told in conference one time about meeting this, I think it was a soldier or a Navy man on a sea vessel who had joined the church, and despite being abandoned by their family and going through all sorts of hardships, was a member of the church. And he asked him, was it worth it all? And the military person kind of turned to him and says, well, it's true, isn't it? And that's so true. It's like, if it is true, the truth of it, the concrete actual truth of it, if you accept that, then that justifies any hardship, any challenge, any payment of tithing. It's all justified because it's true. And I think that's why the world gets blown apart so quickly for people who really did understand that precious core of the church, its truth. Because when they study the history and find out that it's not true, that these things were built on deception and manipulation, then everything gets blown apart. And, I guess what I've been trying to do is, I hear you and others, and I felt this way myself when you look back on choices that you made in your life and aspects of your identity that were built around that deception, and you look back with regret and shame and lost opportunities, and you feel like your life has been stolen from you. I mean, I think that's one way to look back on your life. I've started kind of trying to recreate how I go through that, and that is that everybody's life gets influenced by things around them through things that are legitimate or illegitimate. And I've tried to find, because there was a lot of good stuff in the church. There were things that I found meaning and connection in with my family, events, dealing with, the uncertainty that goes with the transition from childhood to adulthood. All of those things the church has some solutions for that have some healthy aspects tinted with the damaging parts. And so I still want to give value, or I give due acknowledgement that there were aspects of Mormonism that shaped who I am, that I am grateful for and I like, as much as there are aspects that I think damaged me and hurt me. And so it's complicated.
It is, and I guess I should have said when I was, talking before that to me anyway, this is just me, my perspective. I separate the people from the church. If you think about your good experiences, I mean, how many of those were connected to people? Because there's a few jerks and all that, but most of the people are just wonderful, good people. They just want to, live. They're on the Mormon, treadmill there, but they're good people and they just want to do what's right and try to be Christ-like. Some of the most Christ-like people I've ever met, if you want to use that as the way to look at it, is definitely in the church. So everything good that I think about is connected to the people. It's not to the organization. So to me, I separate them. And if any true believing Mormons listening now, I'm not attacking you at all. You're probably awesome. But the church, that's what I have a problem with. So I separate them. But what I found my position in is and it was it kept me awake at night when I was in what has been coined as the dark night of the soul. And it's not one night either, believe me. But as I was figuring all this out, and just undeniably that this is, I'm living in a construct made from corrupt, blah, blah, blah. So what did I feel? Because there's no question that I felt stuff time and time again. What did I feel? And ironically, I felt that same feeling. It just sticks out in my mind. I was drinking a cup of coffee and I felt this feeling. So why am I feeling these feelings? And then if people that do for other religions, I believe you can hear that. Oh, well, they also had religious experiences, and the Mormon. Oh, well, of course they don't have the full truth; they have pieces of it. But there's a couple videos out where you see that all it is videos of testimonies of people: Mormon breakoffs, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, and my experience was not unique. They had just you gotta watch them and hear them yourself though. You can't just say it. You gotta watch them. They are all in. They had whatever their religion or belief or whatever. They felt what I felt. So what was that I felt? That's my question. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Do people who are involved with meditation, and I know Bill Reel is kind of doing podcasts where they do self-worth and meditation. He touches on it. It's very interesting, and I'm totally open to it. But do they also, if you get into the right meditative state, do they feel that same kind of feeling? Because it's a good feeling, and if I could generate it myself, which I do believe it's generated from within, where I'm standing now on the path, anyway. How can I make myself feel that way again? Because it is a good feeling, but anybody, if you read the scriptures and you connect with just some of the teachings of Jesus and all that, you can feel good feelings and everything, and it doesn't have to be connected to anything. But what was that? That was my biggest question, and I finally figured it out. But I haven't figured nothing out really. But I'm terms with it. Here's what's important to me, and what I've seen from my personal friends who have either left the church or they're in the church, or kind of struggling or whatever, because all the truth is coming, the real truth is coming out, is guilt-free freedom. That is my mantra. I can say I'm still processing. I probably will be for the rest of my life and all that. Still trying to figure things out, but I have guilt-free freedom from the church. It no longer has my mind, and that that is a victory, for me. And so now I'm back at square one. And I've talked to my
Well, hold on a second, though, because what you're talking about is specifically one of the things that people demonize about those who leave the church. Well, you just wanted to sin without guilt. So you have to follow up. When I hear somebody like you talk about this notion of guilt-free freedom, then I have to say, are you saying that you can steal and hurt other people and feel no guilt? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I still have my moral compass. I'm back to square one. My folks taught me well, and I have, like I said, I have love in my heart.
Hold on. Are you saying that you can commit adultery without guilt?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, no, I couldn't. Oh my God.
That's the thing is that you're that's the thing is that the people assume that when people talk about feeling guilt-free after leaving the church, that they're adopting the church's narrative. They just wanted to sin without guilt. And you have to draw a line, because there are things that you would sin without guilt. You sitting down in the morning and enjoying a cup of tea while you read the newspaper or surf the web or whatever would be considered sin. And you can do that without guilt. So in that sense, yes, you are happy to sin without guilt from the perspective of Mormons. But that does not translate to you're actually infringing on other people's rights. You're hurting them and not feeling guilt, I guess, if you catch my meaning.
I see where you're coming from, but no, it just, they don't know. I have a moral compass, and there are some people in the world that are shitbags. I mean, they are. I'm sorry. I worked when I was young. I worked on a construction crew with my dad's company, Sling and a Hammer, and I worked with a guy who was a gypsy, and he was proud of it. He says they're gypsies and all this, and he and his family, they would steal and con people, and to them, I mean, that was just part of the way they were, and they were proud of it. So, I mean, that doesn't align with my moral compass, but I guess if somebody like that ever got wrapped up in a church or something, they would, and then they weren't, they could go back to doing that. I don't know. I just know that I have values, but I'm free from the church. I can do what I want, but I don't want to commit adultery. I don't want to go and sin. I mean, I drink a little on the side, but whatever, some coffee, but whatever. It just is not a big deal, because I was there before. I had a life before, and that was part of the reason I really had trouble completely conforming. I mean, one time somebody extended a calling to me, but it was reluctant, because they said, well, kind of concerned that you're kind of like a loose cannon. I'm like, I'm a loose cannon. I mean, gee, what are you talking about? It's just, I think I was, I don't know, too much of an independent thinker, and sometimes if I saw some BS in the church, with the leadership and everything that was going on and the way they did things, I could kind of tell. It doesn't mean that I wasn't really taken in by the thing, but it's like, no, I don't know, I'm not doing that, no.
And you can tell the difference of what type of environment a church is, where they may pull you aside for being a loose cannon, for saying some things. Like if that's what they're doing to the guy that's showing up in a white shirt with his family that maybe just has a hot mouth, then what are they going to do to the guy that smells like cigarettes, that is just sobering up but wants to connect with God in that community? Like that, are they going to feel welcome there at all? And that just kind of really draws the line between what you may find in other Christian communities and how they don't have as rigid a conformity, obedience paradigm. I don't know. For me, that was one of the kind of the eye-opening things, was when I was at that phase where I was looking at other religions and other faiths. Just there was a concept of what a religion was that the church had kind of just pulled over my eyes, because that's the only religion that I ever knew. And I just assumed that every other religion was a top-down hierarchy where appearance and conformity were prime principles. And so it was very eye-opening to go to other communities.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm where I stand now is just me personally. I could feel different later. I felt differently 2 years ago. Oh, I tell you, for example, I saw the Bill. I know you've done stuff with Bill Real, and I really like him. I saw his interview on Mormon Stories, and I was following along because I could really connect. He was a convert. His family, they drank.
Yeah.
It's just not a big deal, guys. I mean, too much of anything. But no, it's just not a big deal. And I'm connected. Oh yeah, I can relate, so much. And then toward the end, he was talking about like Jesus being mythical and all this, and he was going to do mythical. I forget what's called, mythical something podcast. I've listened to him, but at that time, that just struck me. It's like, that's where you've gone, Bill. It's like, oh my goodness, and that really, I think I made a comment. I said no, and I deleted the comment. But it's like, you don't even believe in Jesus now, so whatever. But now, further down the path, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out and whatever. But where I stand now is I believe there's a higher power. I believe that love carries weight, great weight, and so does hate. And just go on. But I'm not going to tell you what to believe. I'm not going to go teach a Sunday school class on it. I'm not going to go on a mission. So I'm back to square one. I told I have two sons. They're all out and everything. We've talked about this really openly. I said, boys, I after all these years of telling you how devoutly, how it's true and et cetera, it's so true, blah, 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 and share my testimony with them, like a caring dad would under the Mormon, construct. And now I'm saying, boys, I'm back to square one, and I I'm a fan of, say, the band Leonard Skinner, and they have a popular song called Simple Man. I put it on the TV, and I put it on I put it on where they show the lyrics. I say, here, watch this with me. I say, this is what I got for you now. This and it's a good song. I mean, it's a good song. I'm telling you, if you go see the lyrics, okay, yeah, I'm down with this. Just be a good person. There's someone up above, and be a simple man, and love people. Blah blah blah. So that's what I got for you now. So here we go. So where do you go from square one? I don't know, but I'll tell you what. I just want to mention this because I was talking about it with my family. I was talking about it with a friend just this past week, just a couple of days ago. The previous caller that said that his relationship, I think it was with his wife or whatever, has never been better. My relationship with my wife and children has never been better because I don't look through it through the Mormon filter. And I'm loving and caring, but I still have that Mormon filter. So there's still, I got to teach my kids. And I taught seminary. I've taught countless gospel doctrine classes in seminary and all that. And so, and I had some friction when my oldest son didn't want to go to seminary the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And so I'm the teacher and blah, blah, blah. But I care about my children and their well-being, and they're doing good, but there's not that pressure. There's not that Mormon. But I'm not going to teach. You're going to be a gypsy and go con people, or you're going to go, be a dirtbag. But,
I think one of the things that you don't realize when you're young, but it becomes very evident as you become an older father and your children get older, is that when you accept Mormonism, you're also accepting this little box that your job is to get your kids to fit inside of this box. And so what you're talking about, I felt the same way with, the kids that are the older ones when they were teenagers and I was still in the believing mode. Well, then a lot of my interactions with them, a lot of the course corrections that I would take as a father for them involved making sure that they were developing in a way that will fit in that box. And when you let go of the notion that the church is the authority to determine what that box is, then it frees you to love your children to conform to whatever shape that they want to conform to. Now, that does not mean that as a father, you're just like, whatever my kids want to do, that's fine. Because we still understand that there is deception, there is manipulation. We know very personally what a false narrative can do to your conception about yourself and the world. And so I think for me personally, I still consider it to be very important to help my children understand the importance of critical thinking and to weigh those influences in their life, because there are forces out there that, even in the secular realm, work to subvert and manipulate people. That's just a reality. If you go and you study cult dynamics, you'll see that this happens in the political sphere. It happens in the New Age, yoga, mental health arena. All these different arenas that have nothing to do with religion still involve this type of manipulation and coercion. So, when I think my family has this sense that, you just letting your kids grow up however they want to grow up. And it's like, well, I'm not confining them to the boundaries that the church has had, But as a father, I still love and care for them, and I still counsel them when there are landmines that I see around them that they may not see. Then I try to influence and help them. But I also understand that sometimes, growing kid, you're going to have to step on some landmines. That's just kind of how it is. And I remember back to the fact that I had to step on my own landmines, and some things you can't prevent your children from learning through experience from. So that's how it goes.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, and if there's, I've been fortunate. If there's ever any serious stuff, I mean, we will talk about it, and I've always been open with them, but it's just better than ever now. But
Yeah.
but instead of like, well, the church says this and this scripture says this, you got to do this. I'm like, well, I don't know. What do you feel about it? What about this? What about that? My older son's in his mid-20s. He's working a job. He's in a supervisor position. He's working with older people and stuff, and all the stuff that goes in the politics of working with people, and in the work world. But as well, okay, well, how did you handle this, and what about this, and it's like, what do you think? Help them sound it out or figure it out. I'm just like a soundboard, and I'm open, and it just does such good when, like, my older son will call me and say, hey, this is what's going on, and maybe try to get your advice and stuff, just like I did with my dad. So I think that most people that are just good people that have moral compasses, they want their kids to do right and do their best, and you never know what's going to happen.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I'm glad to hear that is a connection you've been able to really make flourish in your relationship with your kids. Thank you for calling. I'm going to move on to our next caller, if that's all right, and hope to hear from you again soon, Gibby.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, take care. All right, so if you want to join the conversation, 210-422-2222. There's a comment here from my iPie. Let go of the notion that there is any such thing as critical thinking. It is just a new sanctimonious way of acting like you have no bias from a new brainwashing bias. No one has no bias. Let's grow up. So this is a sentiment that you're going to encounter a lot more, I think, in the modern era, where the concept that everybody has a bias, and so we should let go of the idea that anything is without bias, feeds into notions like, well, there's no such thing as objective journalism, so you just need to choose your bias and then watch the news channel that conforms to your bias. So the people who are left-leaning will watch MSNBC or something like that. The people who are right-leaning will watch Fox News. It leads into the same mentality that you hear from Carrie Milstein defending the Book of Abraham. Well, I have a bias, which is that anything that Joseph Smith said is true, and so I interpret all the facts with that in mind, and I allow the other side to have their bias, and and so everybody has a bias, and we just accept the bias and understand it. So by taking this notion that everybody has a bias, so there's no point in even searching for objective truth, well, then you're kind of retreating back to skepticism, extreme radical skepticism, wherein there is no objective truth. Everybody is simply manifesting their bias, and they're probably going to do it in their own self-interest, which will simply perpetuate the dominant power structures that they inhabit. And so we should simply just allow that to be. And if you want to retreat to that area, then you're going to be basically inhabiting a world where you simply have warring factions of bias, where the only thing that can arbitrate reality is power and force and coercion. Whoever is able to enforce their bias through mass mob rule and power, through political power, and there's no unpolitical way to arbitrate those things, because you're denying any form of objective reality. Now, if you go into the world of science, where science understands that people have bias. There's no such thing as, not having a bias, but that is not a surrender. It is simply a reality that you work to counteract. And that counteracting comes in the form of giving people the power to falsify or disconfirm any assertions that you make. And so you make an assertion understanding that you have a bias and allow other people to confront and critically analyze it using critical thinking skills of logic, presenting further argument, which will work to overcome your bias, because they can point out things that conform with objective reality, that have the power of logic and rationality behind them, that can point out where your bias may have led you to wrong conclusions. And it's that dialogue where people are able to say what they want to say, understanding that people have bias and that they're open to criticism, where we can actually move forward and learn more truths and capitalize on the power of logic and reason and science. Because as soon as you let go of the idea that there's such thing as critical thinking, waving the white flag of, well, everybody has a bias and so there's no such thing as objective truth, then you lose science. So in this channel, as part of me being devoted to critical thinking, I am staunchly in defense of freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And that means that when somebody says something that you disagree with, you don't shut them up and shut them down and ruin their life. You meet that disagreeable speech with your own power of rationality, of argument, with further speech, with more speech. And so I just want to make sure that that is out there. And let's see here. So the response to that is, once you realize that everyone has a bias, you can filter for it through your own bias. But pretending there is no bias is just another form of magical thinking. Seriously, magical thinking. That's one, I think that's a starting point for a lot of people who believe that. So from the medical perspective, biases are powerful. So I am a radiologist and I read CT scans. And in my training, one of the things that was not uncommon was that a surgeon would perform a procedure and then do an imaging study when they were concerned that maybe something went wrong with that procedure. But a surgeon who has performed a procedure has a very powerful bias not to see anything wrong with that procedure, because it would mean that there was something wrong with what they did or something didn't go along. And then they have this conflict between the service that they're providing for someone. So they would come down, and if the surgeon themselves were the only ones that read the CT scan, then that bias may actually lead them to overlook a very serious complication. So the surgeon came down, asked me to look at a CT scan, and I was just a trainee. I wasn't really, advanced, but I could very clearly see that there was something very wrong with this scan. In fact, the part where the bowel was supposed to be sewn together was open, and there was contrast and material spilling out into the belly. And I pointed it out, and the surgeon just refused to see it. He wouldn't see it. Now, I have my own bias as a radiologist, and he had his bias as a surgeon, but he needed me with a different bias to analyze the question so that we could get to something that was close to truth, because it meant something very serious for the patient. The patient may know that everybody has their bias, and people say, well, the radiologist just has a bias to have more imaging procedures done because that's going to make them more money. But the power of everybody having different biases and checking each other is that we can then move closer to truth, understanding that the fact that everyone has a bias does not mean that there's no such thing as truth. Now, if you do want to adopt a kind of what is being called a postmodern way of looking at the world, where there is no such thing as objective truth, everybody has a bias, and your truth is just as good as anybody else's truth, and you should just inhabit that realm, and no one else can check your bias with disconfirming bias, then you're going to end up in a world that's primarily a source of conflict with different factions of different biases vying for power based on political influence. Anyway, so F.W. Willis says, Jonathan, that is the scary dystopian future we're trying to combat. In a world where all evidence is susceptible to manipulation, we need critical thinking skills more than ever. I agree with this. So anyway, all right, so any other callers? 210-422-2222. You're free to join the conversation. I think we were looking at a comment, I forget. So this guy was basically saying, if you can accept a truth relativism, that was a long comment. He was criticizing me for basically abandoning the claims of the church and trying to set myself up as some sort of new prophet. This was 5 years ago. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on this. The whole comment is clearly coming from the perspective of someone who is accustomed to having a sense of certainty about what God's will and law is. It may be that you believe in the legitimacy of church leaders' claim to speak God's law, or it may be believed that the experience of feeling the Spirit confirms the truth of what those men tell you, independent of church leaders. In either event, you actually haven't done the uncomfortable thing of really imagining what it is like to realize that the entirety of Joseph's religious product has no legitimate foundation. It's a mind-blowing experience that's difficult to imagine without actually coming to that point in reality. Is there life after this? Do I have hope of seeing my family in the next life? How can I know what God wants me to do? Is there a God? Why am I even on earth today? Is Scripture real and factual? These are all questions which believing Mormons have never had to actually work out for themselves because the answer to them was provided by church leaders. There's no uncertainty about them. It's a comforting blanket which Mormons don't realize they enjoy. For Mormons, the answers to all these questions and more can be traced back to Joseph Smith. They are a product of the scripture and teachings he brought into the world. It's important to realize that answers to these questions aren't only found in Mormonism. Numerous other religions have come up with their own answers to these questions, and many express them with the same absolute certainty that Mormons feel about their own answers. In each religion, the various answers provide their members with the same feeling of comfort and assurance that Mormons feel about their own answers, and in each other faith, answers can be traced back to some entity which claims legitimate authority to answer the questions. When a questioning Mormon finally comes to the point where they acknowledge that Joseph Smith had no more authority or power to declare God's law than any other religions, then the real crises start. The member has to confront the uncertainty that exists in all of these essential questions as they realize that the source of the answers was faulty. Realizing how much they trusted Joseph only to have that trust betrayed, they become very suspicious of other people claiming to provide such answers. You see, for many ex-Mormons, the struggle is not in trying to find a new provider of truth and certainty. Mormons frequently think that that is what's going on, though. They accuse Mormons of switching to a new false religion or setting themselves up as a new prophet, as you've done here. The struggle is more about learning to deal with uncertainty and doubt because they are an ever-present new reality of life outside of Mormonism. Every Mormon who leaves the church at some point had to trust their own logic, reason, and conscience above that of Joseph or any of the men who has filled his shoes thereafter. That was the first real step into the world of developing your own individual moral identity rather than simply adopting one that was given to you. And that first step is followed by many, many more and is a very individual process. Accepting and dealing with the uncertainty means acknowledging that for many of these important questions, no one has a definitive, authoritative answer. As such, you can find an answer that is meaningful and helpful to you from within yourself because it is just as legitimate as an answer provided by a man in a billion-dollar fancy building proclaiming to speak for God. The last paragraph of your comment lists things you find as shortcomings in what I'm describing. No self-sacrifice, no accountability, you hold all the cards. People who sacrifice themselves to the Mormon Church or any other demanding group do so by paying money, giving time, labor, etc., according to the demands and needs of the group. Letting go of those false controls does not mean that you no longer sacrifice. It simply means that you give meaning and validity to whatever sacrifice you decide is right for yourself, not what a false authority dictates. Once you abandon the controls of men who claim false authority, then you realize that the accountability you bear is not to men holding arbitrary measures of obedience, but rather to the lives and individuals of those around you. Looking down on people who drank coffee or beer or tea is no longer part of that dynamic, and instead you initially feel pangs of shame for how you previously judged them. That is a particularly humbling part of the journey out of Mormonism. You start to learn and accept and love those around you without the judgment you previously felt you were entitled to cast back when you thought you possessed the truth. You do hold all the cards of what you are willing to accept in yourself and from others. That is a good thing. You no longer have to find excuses for things like racism, bigotry, or polygamy. You don't have to find rationalizations for why supposed men of God did unexplainable things. You are free to reject anything which does not meet your standard of truth and hold on to good things wherever you find them. You are still subject to the law, and this concept doesn't mean that you are free to go rape and murder. It just means that you aren't compelled to accept bad things as good in order to preserve the image and control of men claiming divine superiority. You are doing exactly what I warned about in this post, looking at my new feeble car and pitying me for what you perceive to be its pedestrian nature. I wish I could say I was surprised. Anyway, I think that might have been my brother who was trying, he frequently at this time in our relationship would create a pseudonym and put comments down there. And I think there was something worthwhile here, because the response was, okay, how about I put my listening cap on and you tell me one or two things. Describe legitimate authority and give a few examples. Then, time permitting, explain how those who claim false authority breach your model of legitimate authority. Okay, go. All right, so this is my response 5 years ago. I haven't looked at this. I don't remember it. Legitimate authority. Okay. Authority may mean that special knowledge about God and the universe may be considered authoritative and true. It may mean that a person has special privilege to call upon the powers of heaven. It may mean that a person has a right to direct, discipline, or apply certain restrictions on others in their personal life or within the church. In Mormonism, all the authority that any leader claims is derived from the original claims of Joseph Smith. If Joseph's claims to revelation and priesthood authority are fabricated, then no LDS leaders ever had any real authority. In Scientology, it's L. Ron Hubbard, in which any claims to true knowledge or authority derives. In the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's Charles T. Russell. And in Christian Science, it's Mary Baker Eddy, and so on. There is organizational authority, and there is divine authority. As agents of the actual organization of a corporate entity, people in positions of organizational authority have undeniable rights to operate in that capacity. Those offices and rights are spelled out in the original documents. They can determine who is listed on the rolls of the groups and who isn't, who can direct church funds towards whatever use they see fit. They can choose what company to hire for whatever needs. Joseph Smith, Mary Baker Eddy, Hubbard, and all of them certainly had claim to legitimate organizational authority. Divine authority is different, however. Anytime a leader is conveying special proprietary information of a divine nature or affecting somehow the spiritual standing of a member through promotion, discipline, or reproval, they are exercising divine authority. I have no problem with organizational authority. Just as the president of the Rotary Club has certain rights, so does the president of the church and its officers. The problem is when people like Smith and his successors claim divine authority. You and I can look at the claims of divine authority of Hubbard, Eddy, Russell, and so on, and see that they are false and illegitimate. Hubbard's claim that aliens hundreds of thousands of years ago traveled in ships that look like airplanes from the mid-20th century is just a ridiculous anachronism. The whole Xenu story is so clearly a science fiction fabrication that any claims he has to legitimate divine authority are laughable. Mary Baker Eddy claims that the spiritual world is the only reality and is entirely good, and that the material world with its evil, sickness, and death is an illusion and the product of malicious animal magnetism. This concept is so foreign and in contradiction with real scientific observation of the world around us that we can easily see that it and she have no legitimate claim to speak authoritative divine truth. Charles Russell may be more difficult to impeach so easily because he rooted his claims in something that most people are already familiar with and accept, the Bible. By his assertions, if you accept the Bible, you must accept his authoritative interpretation of it. And when you see the product of his claim to authority, though, failed predictions of the return to Christ, depriving children of blood transfusion, imposing shunning of family members, then it becomes clear that his claims are illegitimate. Every individual has a certain legitimate authority and claim over their self. They have self-ownership. An individual gathers data from the world around them and then make choices based on that data. When someone places themselves subject to another's illegitimate divine authority, then they make decisions and react to things in a way that places the pronouncements of the authority in priority over their own self. They make choices and see things in a way that they would not if they did not believe the authoritative claims of the leaders. That is where you can see the real harm of these other leaders' false authority. When Scientologists spend all their retirement savings to have auditing sessions and to purge themselves of harmful thetans, when Christian Scientists spurn medical treatment, when Jehovah's Witnesses lose a child for want of blood transfusion, all these things could be avoided by simply rejecting illegitimate authority. Let's pretend for a moment that Mormonism does have true legitimate authority in the Utah-based corporate, at that time Monson-led flavor of Mormonism. Does a Christian Scientist or a Jehovah's Witness have to learn about and gain a testimony of Mormonism in order to reject the false authority of their religious tradition? No. Members of these religions reject and abandon them every day without knowing anything about Joseph Smith Mormonism and or the priesthood. It follows then that one does not have to know what legitimate authority is in order to reject false authority. You can reject false authority when you examine it and find that it is so full of inconsistencies and falsehoods, manipulation, and flat out abuse that there is no possible way that it is legitimate. That's why so many people reject Mormonism and Joseph's own claim to authority. You asked me for an example of legitimate authority. My response is that the most important authority that you can learn is that of your own self. By only keeping your own mind and authority over yourself, you will be able to avoid the abuse of the various false authorities claiming that you will be damned if you don't follow them. Don't let these other men override your authority of your own conscience and reason. If you ever do come across true legitimate authority, then it will be unavoidable and unmistakable. You won't have to twist logic and reason to keep it consistent. You won't have to avoid uncomfortable dark corners in its history in order to maintain faith. Once people extract themselves from the comforting delusions of Hubbard, Eddy, Russell, and yes, Smith, they can then choose to retain their own authority of conscience, and in doing so, it frees you to start a search for truth, but with the first-hand experience of what it is like to be so totally captured by another's claim to authority that you do so from a very different perspective. For me, it rests in never allowing another man to put himself between my personal connection with God. For you or anyone else, it will be different. All right, so that is that. Okay, well, let's see. We don't have any other calls. It looks like there's some discussion with our denigrator of critical thinking, which you all are welcome to engage in the comments. Certainly it's very pertinent. I think in this era there is a lot of debate about postmodernism and the concept of implicit bias and the existence of objective truth or objective reality. And so that's certainly a lively debate that as a society we're starting to have more at the forefront of social media. So definitely encourage you guys to learn and engage about both sides of that issue, because there's something to learn from both sides. I think the people that are focusing on the fact that everybody has a bias have a really good point. There is something very valuable to learn from the fact that everybody has a bias. I disagree with the conclusion that you may make, which is that if everybody has a bias, then there's no point in even undergoing the project of critical thinking. Critical thinking is one of the things that we do to overcome and account for our biases. So with that being said, I think we will close out today. And until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff. Bye.